it's Nicole and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about deciduous dendrobium orchids. I want to talk about this topic because as we are headed towards the end of summer, there's some action that I typically take on these orchids to get them set up for their quote-unquote dry winter rest. So I've got three different kinds of dendrobiums in front of you. I've got two dendrobium anosmums, a dendrobium nobile, and a dendrobium kingianum. Those are different kinds of dendrobiums, so I'll take you through how I care for these as we start heading into more cooler temperatures. If you guys find these videos helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more orchid content like this. With that said, let's jump right in. You guys are probably wondering why I'm talking about deciduous dendrobium orchids now. And while they've got a distinct growth pattern where they grow very quickly in the spring and summer months, and then they take a dry winter rest in the fall and winter months. That's also the time that they start blooming as well. So in the summer, especially towards the end of the summer, we want to monitor their new growths. And once they finish maturing, we want to stop fertilizing them. So it's going to be very important because if you keep fertilizing them too long, you're going to start getting keikis instead of blooms. So that's something to keep an eye on. Now, I'll take you closer, but the dendrobium anosmums are still growing a bit. And the Dendrobium nobile is almost done. So I'm going to be monitoring in the next couple of weeks, and I'm going to be slowing that fertilizer down and then just give it water. I want to bring this up because I do have other deciduous orchids, such as my catasetums, which are still in active growth. So you sort of have to separate these guys at some point, especially in the beginning of September, where you're no longer feeding them and you're just giving them water. Then in around September, I start slowing the water down a bit. And then when the temperatures start cooling outside, where the temperatures are cooler outside than they are inside, I take these guys outside with the exception of any seedling orchids. So the Kingianum in the front is not going to get a winter rest. I prefer for the orchids to be mature before I give them a winter rest, and seedlings are still quite young and still have to grow. You'll start noticing, along with the reduced fertilizer, then you start throttling back the watering. Some leaves may turn yellow and fall off, which is completely normal. And you also have canes already from previous seasons, which have already dropped their leaves. That's a good sign, and it's just showing that the orchid is doing what it's supposed to be doing. In the wild, these orchids are growing in areas that have less rainfall in these dry winter periods. So by giving them a dry winter rest, you're sort of mimicking what these guys get in the wild. So the way that I handle the dry winter rest in my indoor conditions is I bring these guys out to my fire escape and I let them sit out there once the temperatures hit around the upper 50s. And I choose this time because that's when the temperatures are more cooler outside than they are inside in my apartment. I'll then leave the Dendrobium nobile orchid out there until just about the first frost. So last year I brought the nobile orchid in, I believe when it started hitting 40 degrees, it was maybe even upper 30s when I first started bringing it in, and then it started forming buds. For the Dendrobium anosmums, I actually don't leave them outside very long. I'll leave them outside until it's like in the 50s and maybe upper 40s, and then they can come inside. They don't need to get as cool to trigger their blooms. So what I do with those is they'll go outside for a couple of weeks, and then I'll leave them near a window that I can crack open where they can get some cool air. So they're getting nighttime temperatures in the upper 50s. And last year, both of these guys gave me blooms, the two anosmums in the back, but one of them only gave me one bloom. So I'm gonna see if cooling it down further will give me even more blooms. Now, in terms of giving them water, I found that giving them a little bit of water isn't detrimental to this quote-unquote dry winter rest. Theoretically, they call it a dry winter rust, but these guys may get a little bit of dew or misting out in the wild. So if they do get some water, that's fine. The point is that they're not getting regular water. So they're getting less water than they would normally get in the summer. And the trigger is once they stop getting that water, they'll start dropping leaves, which is totally normal. Now, provided everything went well with the winter rest, you'll start getting buds. Now, once on the Dendrobium nobile, once I got a bunch of keikis, and my orchid was full of keikis, and the biggest mistake there was that I continued to fertilize the orchid a little too long. So I'm making this video now because now I'm starting to look at these orchids to see where they are in their maturity. They start forming little terminal leaves at the very top, showing that they're done growing. So in this case, once it grows, there's not another one coming. It sort of looks like this, where nothing else is going to come up. Now, if we take a look at this orchid over here, this could be the last leaf. I'm going to monitor to see, but it does look a little bit different on top. So I'm just watching to see where their last leaf is coming in, and I think those could be it for that Dendrobium nobile. For the Dendrobium anosmums, you could sort of tell as well, it'll just stop. The leaf just looks a little bit different than the other leaves. So we want to stop fertilizing, and that can also happen late summer, which is why it's important to start thinking about the winter rest right now. In short, just keep an eye on your deciduous orchids as they're finishing up their growing as you're heading into late summer, and you want to stop feeding them. You'll then slow their water down and give them cooler temperatures. These three orchids that I have are the Dendrobium nobile, the Dendrobium anosmum, and the Dendrobium Kingianum. They all need a cooler period in order to flower. So I'm watching them closely to see when they finish maturing those growths. I'll stop fertilizing, then I'll start throttling the water back. Then we start giving them cooler temperatures as in my environment, my conditions will allow. So I'll leave them outside up until frost, and then I start noticing buds once I bring them in. Now you don't want to start watering until you start seeing that you actually do have flower buds. Sometimes I've seen what I thought were flower buds and then they turned out to be keikis. You'll still water once you see the keikis, in my opinion, because then it's going to just eat up your plant a bit, especially if your orchid is covered in keikis. But one of the signs that it was fed too much, a little too late, is when you start seeing keikis. Once you stop giving it keikis after the active growth is done, then you'll start seeing flowers, and then you'll be able to water again. For the nobile, at least in my environment, I notice that it starts blooming for me as soon as I bring it in. So that can be around December. Some folks, it blooms for them in the spring. I think it's very contingent to your environment. So if you live out in, say, California, and you can leave your orchids out all year, you're gonna have a different blooming period. Same thing with Florida. It'll probably start blooming as the cooler night temperatures come, but that could be much later in the year. Anyway, guys, these orchids are wonderful. They're all fragrant. The anosmums smell like raspberries, and the Dendrobium nobiles vary in fragrance, but they smell a little bit like cattleyas, so they're very pleasant. I have not bloomed that Kingianum yet, but I have bloomed a hybrid which smelled like roses. So these orchids, they do require a little bit of extra attention and care, but they're very worth it. These are really nice orchids. And then the plus for the anosmum orchids is that they can bloom while they're still very young. So if you can believe it, the two anosmums were actually seedlings. So they bloom for me within a year, which is fantastic, and they just smell like wonderful raspberries. So they're very rewarding. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye, everyone.